Resilience is joy. Resiliency is fun. Resiliency is the ability to be able to bounce back, not rigidly. It's not that military or militant style. I can't show my feelings. I can't show who I really am for fear of being judged. I say, allow yourself to break.
Resilience isn't just about pushing through hard times. It's about embracing the chaos of life, finding strength in our struggles, and allowing ourselves to lean into the full spectrum of emotions that we're feeling, even when they're really uncomfortable. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Dr. Neeta Bhushan, an inspiring leader in emotional health and resilience, whose story reminds us that it's often in the hardest moments that we uncover our greatest potential for growth. Dr. Neeta's path is extraordinary. She began her career as a cosmetic dentist, but her life transformed through a series of profound personal challenges that led her to work in emotional healing. Now, as the founder of the Global Grit Institute, the host of the Brave Table podcast, and author of Emotional Grit and That Sucked, Now What?, she's dedicated her life to helping others thrive from the inside out. Dr. Neeta's approach blends Eastern wisdom, therapeutic psychology, and insights from her own personal journey of overcoming loss, leaving an abusive marriage, and discovering the power of vulnerability. In our conversation today, Dr. Neeta and I explore how resilience, community, and vulnerability are essential not only for emotional health, but also for our physical well-being and longevity as well. We dive into topics like healing generational trauma, the role of community in supporting a meaningful life, and how facing life's chaos with open arms can lead us to deeper peace and joy. This episode is all about finding the courage to live fully, celebrate openly, and create a life that's not just about surviving, but truly thriving. I am so happy to share this conversation with you. I'm Dr. Avanti, and this is The Healing Catalyst. Hello, Neeta. It is so great to see you again. It's been just a few days.
Yes, I'm so glad we're doing this.
Yes, I'm so glad to have you on my podcast. It was fun seeing you in Austin a few days ago, so I'm so happy to welcome you on my podcast now. So thank
I'm
you for
so
being
glad
here.
to be here. Yay.
Yay. So I want to jump into so many things that were in your book. I've been following you for quite a while, and I just love so many things about what you've been talking about. I'd really love if you could start, for my listeners who maybe don't know your work, don't know you, talking about some of the personal losses that you really experienced early in life, which sort of sparked your whole journey into this world of coaching, emotional resilience, beauty in the chaos, all the things you talk about. If you could share with us, that'd be great.
Oh, wow. Yes. Well, I guess, going back to my roots in Chicago would probably be a sufficient place to start. I have the eldest syndrome, the martyr syndrome of being the oldest girl in a Filipino Indian household, born to tiger parents, and parents wanted to chase the American dream, and that they did. And early on, they taught us, doctor, dentist, lawyer, engineer, and so that was kind of the path. Along with keeping up with the Joneses, right? So we were schlepped into ballet and dance and Indian dance and Filipino dance and all of the extracurriculars. And life would just take a turn when I was 10 because I grew up early. And between 10 and 19, I would go through probably, one of the hardest times in my life. My mom was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 10. And as the eldest of, two younger brothers, that was a very, different and a very almost confusing time because I was having to not really understand what was happening. There's a story I share in the book around, I was left with my great grandmother, and my mother was, getting the mastectomy, double mastectomy, and I had woken up with chicken pox. So I was like basically covered from head to toe,
Mhm.
lying in my, princess canopy bed. And all of a sudden, I'm like with my great grandmother, who this is my mom's grandmother, who I remember her, Lola. She like barely spoke any, English, only like Tagalog, but she's like, didn't want to touch me because, I have this raging chick box and I'm itching from head to toe. And she leaves this bottle of calamine lotion and she's like, Anak, you just put this on your body. And I'm like, okay, I'll never forget the pink calamine lotion that I had to use to take care of myself. Obviously, she probably didn't want to get sick, or maybe she didn't know any better, but I just made a meaning in my mind that day that, okay, no one's here for me. I'm going to have to take care of myself. And that was
Mm.
literally the beginning of the ownership of taking care of my family, because then at 16 she would succumb to the disease. It had spread throughout her body and she transitioned, and so we lost her when I was 16, and then a year later we lost my brother suddenly to an asthma attack. The spiritual essence of that is they were always so close, and he
Mm.
collapsed just right in front of his school literally it was a year after my mom died and on my youngest brother's 12th birthday. So it was so much tragedy, so much chaos, so much like, oh my gosh, when's the shoe going to drop? Like, is this too good to be true? So this started to imprint in my adolescent years. And then 2 years after that, the unthinkable, unimaginable happened. My dad was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. He had an inoperable tumor, and the doctors gave him 9 months to live, and they were right, because he passed on just shy of my 19th birthday. So at 18 I was orphaned, and I was the caregiver to my youngest brother,
Mhm.
who was 14 at the time. So I had the most incredible chip on my shoulder as I got into my 20s, because I wanted to really prove to the world that we weren't just a sob story, that whatever it was, I was going to, keep charting and literally run up the next mountain that I could, which was achievement based academia, accolades, awards, etc. And honestly, that became one of my greatest coping mechanisms.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you for sharing that with me,
Mhm.
and with all of us. It's hard to imagine what it must have felt like to have those losses happen. I mean, mom, brother, and then a few years later, your dad, and sort of feeling alone and responsible for your youngest brother at such a young age. That's a lot to carry. It's a lot to
Mhm.
carry.
Yeah.
How do you think that experience sort of shaped your ability to be resilient? Because it's one thing to use the coping mechanism, which we'll get to in a little while. I want to talk about that because I identify so much with what you're talking about, being South Asian and the eldest daughter, and like all the patterns that we have, very, very similar, of using overachievement to sort of cope and suppress all the feelings. But how do you think, your sort of path to becoming more resilient sort of happened or started?
Yeah, you can't unknow what you know,
Mhm.
right? Like when you
Right.
see the truth, you just can't unsee it. And what I mean by that is at 10 years old, I was exposed to what that would look like to not have the person that I looked at as my world. Literally, she's not there for one of my most sacred moments imprinted as a child. And then, years later into that, then she had been sick. She was in, remission, and it came back, and we had that kind of dance with it, but it was uncertain. And so, I was always told as a young girl, Neeta, you're so resilient. Neeta, you're so strong. And I think it was, for Filipino, Indian, or for Asian families, when you are faced with adversity, challenges, setbacks, they don't really know what to say. So they'll say, "Oh my gosh, you're so
So
strong."
strong.
Like, that's it.
You're so
And
strong.
so,
You're so strong.
yeah, don't cry. You're so strong. Don't
Mhm.
cry. Don't get
Mhm.
sad. You're so strong. Like, I can't tell you
Mhm.
the amount. And in looking back, I'm like, wow, because they just felt so helpless.
Right.
And it's not in our custom to be able to grieve all of the unknowns. And boy, would I have a first class seat in grieving in my adolescence. And I think that I talk about resiliency in my book in ways to redefine resiliency, because I was taught to be strong. I was taught to put away all of my emotions. I was taught to shove it under a rug. I was taught, like, okay, I have to keep the stoic face because I've got to be strong for the rest of my family, for my brothers, for everyone. They can't see me cry. So God forbid I fully break down. And it definitely shaped me in a lot of ways for years. I mean, even after my dad passed, at his funeral, I couldn't even give a speech. I was so broken. And because what would happen? What would they say if I would crack in front of everyone? God forbid if I just
Mhm.
shed a tear or wail at the top of my lungs or scream.
Sure.
And would that be acceptable? And so I didn't do it. And so, it informed how I would then cope a decade later in one of the most powerful life lessons I would learn, because I went on to succeed in every area of life, quote unquote, outward success. So I became, the cosmetic dentist, not just the general dentist. I opened my practice early on. I was probably one of the only females that did that early on, but definitely one of my only classmates that did that pretty much right out of school, like 2 years out of school. And I had this badge on my shoulder. I had the
For
chip
sure.
on my shoulder. I wanted to prove to the world that I wasn't this broken girl, because I had a
Mhm.
very twisted meaning of what that was like. You couldn't break. But when I was
Mhm.
doing research for my latest book, and, you know, I had already written my very first book, which was pretty much a very different book, but it's along the same lens. But I really wanted to go deeper into resiliency. And when I looked up the Latin word, or the meaning of resiliere, that means, it's the root of resilience. It means to bounce back. Well, if we, take a glass of water, or if we take something that's as tough as nails, right? Maybe it's maybe it is glass, and I fill it up with water and I just let it go. Well, that glass is going to break. It's going to shatter into a million pieces. And what if that is a good thing? What if that is the softness that we need? And for me, I would learn it real time on December 31st, when I had to walk away from a marriage that on the outside it checked all the boxes. But on the inside, I was literally in a very toxic relationship. And I didn't realize that the three words that I needed, that I called out for on December 31st, 2011, was, I need help. And I need help allowed me to fully melt. It allowed me to fully ask for the help. It allowed me to fully unravel. It allowed me to finally begin a journey that was so long. And I couldn't stuff all of those emotions in that closet anymore. I couldn't stuff it under my bed. I couldn't stuff it under, it was spewing and spilling out of me in every which way. and I had to be present for it. I could no longer be the tough cookie. I was crying in front of my team. I fully
Mhm.
would break down, and I had my mask and my goggles because I was wearing my white lab coat, and it
Mhm.
was my practice, but I would still just in full tears just let it all out in front of my team, and
Mhm.
they're like, what is happening? Where I had to really share the truth. The truth was I left in a very toxic relationship, and for those moments which felt like literally an eternity, but it was the most tumultuous time of my life because it seemed like everything was crashing down as it should, because when we break open into the next
Sure.
iteration of who we are meant to be. And that was the greatest blessing, because I finally was able to let people in. I let my team in. I shared in the middle of a, work break. I think this is also another story in the book that I said, and literally we had all patients in all of our rooms. It was one of those really busy days. And I couldn't take it anymore. I was like, I am just sobbing. Like, nobody could really see, but I'm like, everyone could just notice, like, what is going on with her? That I pulled everyone in the break room. I had about 10 people, or maybe it was 12. And I said, and they're like, what is going on? Like, we have a really busy day. Is there something that you need to tell us? And I said, I don't know if we're going to keep the doors open. I'm going through this very personal time right now. And either you're here or you're not. I get it. If you need to walk away because you need to feed your families, I'm going to try to keep this open for as long as possible. But I am going through a very tough time right now. And this is when I had packed up all of my belongings in my car. I was staying in friends' couches in the very early stages of that. But the amount of outpouring, the amount of love, the amount of, you can stay at my house. Oh my gosh, let's find another doctor to cover. Oh, I've got you. Let's do your notes. Let's do, like, they were just, it was just a family that I needed because I finally let them in. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so what is your definition of resilience then? Because, it's not the I'm strong, I'm strong. I so identify with so much of what you're saying, having
Mm.
been through this breast cancer journey this past year. And for me, it's been learning also to allow other people to help me, to say I need help. So much of what you just said. So how do you define resilience? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, resilience is joy. Resiliency is fun. Resiliency is the ability to be able to bounce back, not rigidly. Like, what is rigid? Like, when I think of resiliency, I think one of those like bouncy medicine balls that you squeeze. It's got the agility, it's got the softness, it's got the bend to it. I grew up, ballet dancing. And when I see dancers perform, when I see acrobatics perform, you see their agility, you see the way they bend, you see the way they move, you see their softness, you see their grace, but you also see that quiet strength. And I think that is the beauty. It's not that military or militant style. I can't show my feelings. I can't show who I really am for fear of being judged.
Right.
Where I think so often, because we're conditioned in a certain way,
Mhm.
it wasn't okay for our families to express. It wasn't okay for my
Right.
families to express.
Mhm.
It was so painful. And they were just trying to be strong for us because they didn't know any better.
Mhm.
And I say, allow yourself to break. It's such a
Mhm.
beautiful
Mhm.
way to not only build the strength and the toughness. And I'll tell you this, it's not the toughness that we need, it's the softness that we need.
Right.
But through that, there is this inherent strength,
Right.
because isn't it resilient to allow yourself to break down in front of the people that are the most special in your lives? And because we put up these facades and these walls,
Mhm.
people can't get in.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, all they want to do is to be able to support you. I was putting livelihoods for so many of my team members, and I was shutting them out completely. And of course, in my energy and my frenetic energy, I was freaking out in my mind. And for that, for people to say, wow, thank you for letting us in, because I've been there too. My sister's going through it. My cousin went through something like that. And so it's like we have so much shame, but the allowance we're giving others permission to actually share their stories, and all they want to do is to be able to provide and give. And so from that day, it sparked a whole kind of waterfall effect of
Mm-hmm.
the incredible community I was able to build. It changed my full leadership style. And it's one of the superpowers that I have is vulnerability, is
Mm-hmm.
that resiliency to be able to share, yeah, that sucked. Now what?
Mm-hmm.
That we're not no longer in the suck. We can sit in the suck for as long as we want, but we can actually say, well, that sucked. Now what? Now I need support. Now I need help. Now I can't go on this journey by myself. And so what that looked like for me was literally unlearning and unraveling and undoing all of the tight knots and the tight hold, or that I had on myself, of my own judgments of what is safe to share or what is professionally acceptable. I threw all of that stuff out the window, because
Right.
what I learned then in my approach was, oh wow, year after year, in those dark moments, that year we grew 30%. And I was taking the most time off I've ever taken. I got better. I got the help I needed. I'm like, I don't know if I'm a good leader, but all I know is what I was doing beforehand is not working. So I'm
Right.
just going to let everyone in.
Yeah.
And the amount of coaches and therapists and group think tanks and, consultants that I had, not only in my business acumen, because I was fully falling apart and I needed support so that I could take the time away to go and heal the decades worth of the losses, the grief, the trauma that I had, my own shadows, my own insecurities, about being enough, about being worthy of having an incredible team that would take it on without me being there. Before all of that, I had embezzlement stuff. I had a lot of different these these negative energies, if you will. I'm very spiritual, but in the forms of people, relationship, circumstances that would come into my life to teach me something. And I was completely broken open to say, okay, I receive. What is this trying to teach me right now? What do I need to really
Mm-hmm.
learn about this moment? And I mean, year after year, then everything fully changed. It's
Mm-hmm.
like on the business level, because I was less on that control side, everything started to flow. I had natural leaders that were already in my team that were showing up. It allowed me
Yep.
to take off as much time as I needed. And I grew monumentally because I was able to pay attention to the little Neeta that didn't get to express, the little Neeta that never could break down, the little Neeta that couldn't really rage or be angry. I would always, when I would see those angry memes on social media or in magazines that they would make fun of these women going batshit crazy, I would be like, oh gosh, they can't get a hold of their
Right.
anger. Like, what's wrong
Right.
with them? And here I was
Right.
suppressing my
Mm-hmm.
anger. I was suppressing my anger of the doctors telling me that
Right.
another person was going to die when I was
Mm-hmm.
19, 18 in a
Right.
diagnosis. It
Mm-hmm.
was a lot of those things I had to refeel and allow
Sure.
my little girl to fully express as
Yeah.
well.
Thank you for sharing so many personal stories and emotions. I know
Mm.
that's not easy to do. And so I really, really appreciate that. And what kept coming up for me as you were saying that is sort of this Ayurvedic perspective of the qualities and opposites, right? This hardness. And I could feel myself as you were telling that story sort of tensing up because I identify with it so much. I mean, I probably think I spent my whole life doing the same thing of just being the strong one, being strong, showing people what I could do. I'm not bothered. I will make it through anything, through medical school, through training, through whatever it is, right? I'm just going to push right through. No one's going to see me break down, crack, right?
Mhm.
And what you're talking about with the resilience and the softness is that balance, right? Because if you just have that hardness all the time, at some point it's going to crack, right? It's
Mhm.
like a hard like ball of ice, if you want to think about it that way. But what you're talking about is having like a bouncy ball, right? That has the softness and hardness. It can bounce back, right? And so there again, I see Ayurveda, right? That beautiful balance of both opposites, right? And so, because even being too much in the emotional realm can also be problematic because then you can't really exist in the world. It can become very overwhelming to even just, be in this material world if you're so in tune with your emotions all the time and responding to it. So it's like this healthy balance of being able to do both, right?
Mhm.
But we live in a Western world that is very much on the opposite side of that masculine energy of hard and push it down and suppress it, right? That was
Oh,
what was
yeah.
really coming up for me a lot while you were talking about that.
Yeah, I mean, we're taught to be in our full masculine as women,
Mhm.
and I think this era of like entering into that softness, entering into that full femininity where, this when you talk about the patriarchy, it we live in that patriarchal society where we are lauded on our achievements. We are lauded on how much we can, are on our accolades, and we're lauded on our successes, monetary, and our ego loves that. Yet, what if there was a different metric? And what if the
Mhm.
metric was the depth of your relationships, or
Right.
the depth of your relationship to yourself, where
Mhm.
that you have such incredible attunement to your own needs that you could
Mhm.
actually say no, or you can say, actually, yes, I would love to get your help next week, Tuesday or Thursday. When do you want to come? And instead of, in our culture, it's very safe to say that you're not even supposed to say yes when somebody is saying like, can I get you something? Can I do this? Or can I offer you water when you're going to their
Right.
house? And it's like, no, you have to say no 3 times if you're going to go, to your auntie's house in India. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, why? I really need the water. I'm actually thirsty. Like, I'm
Right.
going to accept that. But it's like a no, 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 because, and
Mhm.
so my work now, and the whole idea for, this newest book, That Suck Now What, How to Embrace the Joy in Chaos and Find Magic in the Mess, is because we will all have our magical moments of suck. And to your point, yes, I think I do see there's one group of people that they are definitely sitting in the suck. You probably hear your aunties or your uncles, and they keep talking about like, oh my gosh, my pain is this bad, or my headache is this bad, or I can't believe that person wronged me and it was like 20 years ago, or they have a conflict with some other cousin or brother or whatever in their household. They're not talking to them for 15 or 20 years, and it's still there, and they're sitting in that suck instead of getting out of it, because they've
Right.
become addicted to that pain.
Exactly.
They become addicted to that pain of the arthritis, or
Mhm.
the whatever, the bloating, the
Sure.
the the thing that causes them to feel seen and to feel
Mhm.
heard,
Mhm.
and they just don't know any other way. Whereas the majority of us, we're like, all right, I learned meditation, I'm gonna meditate, and I'm done. I didn't even feel that, because, and so then we bypass our full emotional expression, because we're like, no, I read that in an article somewhere. I watched this, I watched this episode of them talking
Right.
about that, and
Right.
I just put my hand over my heart, and now I'm good.
Right.
No,
No.
there's
Right.
times where we actually need to allow ourselves to feel. And the biggest learning lesson for me was, even after the 7 years that I took back to kind of find myself again, in all of the deep dives that I did with all of the ancient philosophy, and going to different workshops and healers and therapists and all of the different alternative modalities from different walks of life all over the world. I still, I was able to find love again. So that's number one, which was great. And then I started my journey in motherhood. But then in motherhood, it opened up a whole can of worms on the work that I still didn't quite dive into, which was really healing my inner child. And, psychologists will say it's really connecting to that younger part of you and all the different parts of you. There's a beautiful book by Richard Schwartz, which is No Bad Parts. It's a beautiful book. There's another one called the Whole Brain Child, but No Bad Parts. It's a beautiful book around really being able to notice, because the way our nervous systems are built, it's obviously a reflection of all of the things that we were exposed to when we were
Sure.
young.
Hmm.
And if we're not healing those parts, it will come up in relationship. It will
For
come
sure.
up when you have your children.
Hmm.
And so for myself, it was, oh, am I going to be okay with this baby crying
Right.
for moments and like hours and hours at a
Hmm.
time? What am I doing wrong as a parent? You're doing nothing wrong. They're actually
Right.
supposed to cry.
Right.
Right. And so we internalize all of this, but it's to say, oh, and then you hear your elders saying, shush, 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 give them the candy, give them the thing, give them extra milk. Oh, they need more
Hmm.
milk. Well, actually, that's how they express. They will cry. They are
Right.
meant to cry.
Right.
And so that was just my initial peek at, wow, we really need to heal a whole generation. We need to heal how
Yep.
we are going to reparent ourselves.
Hmm.
And it's one of the reasons why one of the main frameworks of my book is called the bounce factor. And it's one of the most fundamental tools I now teach in our institute that we have, and in all of the other programs that I am now committed to, because I did retire as a dentist about 9 years ago. And I took a walk on this journey of helping other people, just like yourself, just like, other women and men who are like, okay, I wasn't given the tools when I was younger. I was told exactly that. And now we have this way to reframe that, maybe heal ourselves, so that one day, if we do have that legacy and we do have children, or we do fall in love, it's not spilling over into our own projections into that relationship.
Yeah. What's so interesting about what you're saying is that, my children are now in their 20s. And for me, that piece of reparenting myself actually didn't really happen with them because, again, I just pushed through. Like, I'm the mom, I'm the doctor, I have 100 different things to do, all these roles and responsibilities. I'm just going to push through and do it. I was super present to my kids, I'm very connected to them. And for me, that point of reparenting came when my body got a breast cancer diagnosis. That is when I completely cracked open, like completely cracked open. And that for me was sort of this type of time of saying, how am I going to reparent myself? How am I going to accept love, accept help, right? Receive it. That was really, it was huge for me. And, so this gets to another thing I really want to talk about with you, which is, we both know because of the work that we do that emotional trauma is our emotional health is directly connected to our physical health and what will come up physically. Did you have any experience of that at all, of any emotional to physical sort of things happening?
Oh yes. I mean, obviously now looking back, and my
Hmm.
my own mom's, my all of my three family members, my mom, my brother, and my dad. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I went into medicine. It's one of the
Hmm.
reasons why I have become such a health nut and a wellness geek, is because I was so curious on how I was going to connect the dots, and how this topic of, the full spectrum of our emotionality, the full spectrum of our emotional grit, which was my first book, the full spectrum of our emotional resilience, this latest book, it really comes down to, in the Chinese medicine has it right? There are certain organs that,
Hmm.
if
Sure.
You are definitely, and obviously Ayurveda has this as well,
Yeah.
our ancient
Mhm.
worlds, they, you know, problems with the lungs. There's unresolved grief there, right? The
Mhm.
breasts.
Mhm.
We're not paying attention to ourselves. We're so focused
Mhm.
on othering
Right.
and mothering and othering that
Yep.
we're not taking
Mhm.
on our own milk.
Yep.
We make the milk here.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, with both of my dad and my brother, my dad had stage 4 lung cancer. He had lost two people before. I mean, this came up kind of so sudden, and there's obviously so much grief. My brother having, just his with an asthma attack. I mean, he he was okay until he wasn't. Again, like massive grief. He was really close to my mom. And so it kind of informed me as well. I mean, in my 20s, now obviously I didn't know all of this until, started really fully researching this about almost a decade ago, because that's when I really got into the work during my own independent awakening when I finally had my own divorce. In my 20s, I had so much. I had so many issues in my gut.
Mhm.
I had so many issues with my throat. I had a tonsillectomy when literally I was in dental school, and I
Yeah.
remember having another swell, and just my throat would swell up constantly, and I was constantly on antibiotics for, it was like probably once a month, where I needed to get my tonsils removed. Well, your tonsils
Mhm.
are it's your throat chakra. It's your
Mhm.
expression. And I was in that toxic, tumultuous relationship.
Right.
And that's where you're fully expressing. I was not expressing at the time. I was pretending everything was okay. With my gut, I had constant IBS. I had constant anxiety. I had constant worry, this pit, this lump in my stomach. And it was the anxiety of like, okay, am I going to be okay? Constant in my, from 20s till I finally got out and started to really heal my body mentally,
Mhm.
physically, spiritually.
Mhm.
I didn't really connect the dots until much, much later
Right.
of, oh wow, it's no wonder that you had a lot of
Right.
anxiety in your 20s. It's no wonder that
Mhm.
you had a lot of digestive issues. I would have a Pepto Bismol on my bedside after I would go and have food because I
I
had so
had them
many
in
food
my
intolerances.
I had them in my my white coat pockets, when I was walking around the hospital.
Yeah, and now I'm
Yeah,
like can barely stand to look at those things
I
because
know,
like
right.
there's other ways.
Yeah,
Uh, but I just thought that was just my thing. I mean,
right.
and so and you realize, oh wow, this goes deeper, that all of it is connected in our emotions, and the unresolved emotions in our gut. Our gut is our second brain. It has, I mean, of course, this, right? As many neurons as we have in our brain, we have in our gut. And that's why we say, all right, we've got that gut feeling. And so this was the work. This was the
Mhm.
full unraveling.
Mhm. And so what I'm thinking about as you're saying this is this idea of sitting in the chaos, which you've talked about, right? And that there's magic in there. And then I'm also relating it to this idea of saying yes to life. I wrote about this in my book on longevity, is that, you know, there are moments where we can just turn away from life and say, I'm out. I'm just going to push through, and I'm going to cancel everything else because I have to just move through, and you say no to everything else, right? And sort of like are working against life. But this idea of sort of saying yes to life and sort of embracing what you say is the suck, right? The chaos. And that's kind of saying yes to all aspects of life, right? How do you how do you feel like having a balance between all of that helps with emotional resilience?
I think there are seasons, right? And
Mm-hmm.
especially when I was writing this book, I was in the season and the throes of like the thickness of motherhood. I was We
Mhm.
had just moved from LA to Austin. I
Mhm.
had a toddler, and I was pregnant, and I was probably throwing up about 10, almost 10 times a day, some days 10 times a day. So I was at my leg, and and we were remodeling a home because I wanted to nest, and there were all of these desires that I had because I wanted to make sure everything was okay before baby came. And we were in a brand new city. We didn't have much help. We didn't have our families around. I mean, I went into full like let's go mode,
Yeah.
and it was so chaotic. And I had gotten this book deal around that same time,
Mhm.
actually, when I was giving birth to my daughter. Literally,
Mhm.
that's a whole story in and of itself. And so I think there are seasons in life where life is going to give you those chaotic moments. And we know this through even Vedic astrology. If you've grown up in that, which is tied to the Vedas, which is tied to Ayurveda. And, you know, it's those seasons, in the seasonality of, okay, you've got 4 years in medical school, dental school, that is the season. And then you have your season of getting married, right? With all of the things that two families are coming together. If you are an Asian brown family, there's a
Mhm.
lot of those elements.
Yep.
That's the seasonality of your life.
Right.
Can there be moments of grace? Can there be moments of joy where during those moments of chaos, where it is preparing you for your resiliency, which is why I say resilience is joy, that
Mm.
where you can actually have the ability to bounce back, but
Right.
you're choosing joy in the process because
Mhm.
it is there for you.
Right.
I remember moments where, going back to, where I was seeing my mother in the hospital, my dad in the hospital for weeks and months at a time. I would still find slivers of joy. I was like, actually, no, there was a guy at the coffee stand in the hospital that I would be so looking forward to seeing when I would go visit my mom and or my dad. So those sliver moments, did that person make my day because they smiled at me, the barista? Yes. Was that a moment of joy that we just can take for granted, right? But it did make your day in the process. And so, if we're talking about balance, it exists, but I think in seasonalities. Like
Mhm.
when I was in the throes of motherhood, it was probably more chaotic than not. Like I'm talking real early, like the first 2 years where you're in that full baby bubble. And there had to be moments where you had to choose joy, where
Mhm.
you were going to change your clothes and not wear the same thing that you wore for the last 3 days.
Sure.
You will take a shower. You will
Right.
make something work, put the baby in like in the bathroom,
Mhm.
in the bouncy with you so that you can shower. And you would put makeup on because at least that was
Yeah.
your sliver of joy.
Right.
Maybe you would walk around the block. You weren't going to go to a class because maybe you didn't have time, but did you have 10 minutes to walk around the block? And maybe you
Right.
get that sunshine in. And so that's what I'm talking about, the seasonality.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
in those moments, you can find that center
Yeah.
and balance.
Yeah. And so, how do you think this joy and sort of emotional resilience plays into longevity, into our health span and the vitality with which we live, our later years as we go on? Because I do think it's connected. But for you, how do you see sort of this idea of resilience and joy connected to that?
Wow. I mean, it's so evident now, right? Like,
Mhm.
what is it? 1 in 3 people uh, are facing loneliness, or 1 in 4 have some sort of mental illness or are plagued with like anxiety, depression, on antidepressants. And and I don't know, this might be a long shot, but could it be because we are so afraid of feeling our feelings? Could it be because we're so afraid of expressing our emotions that we tend to bury when somebody slights us, and we're not able to fully express? We're not able to say I need help. We're not able to say, God, I could really use a friend right now. we're not able to be fully emotional. And, I'm just talking about women, but even with men, we're not even allowing them to fully express. In fact, they don't even have an outlet. At least with us women, we talk about things, we
Yeah.
vent.
Uh-huh.
But where are they also allowing themselves? And so this is a real issue. And when you look at, I think we were just talking about this, Dan Buettner has his series, How to Live to 100, and the blue zones, and he's done all of this research in the blue zones. Of course, you know this, but when they researched and they looked at all of the communities who are living to 100, and even if we look at our Desi community, how it's such a collectivist community and collectivism. I mean, they're living. They're living a really long time. I think we shared even on my podcast that I don't know anyone who does not already have a dadi or a nani that's living well into her 90s.
Right.
And what are they doing? Well, they're doing all of the things, but they're not keeping the stressors that we're doing on the day to day, and they have a really amazing social circle. They have a community where they're not self-isolating, and we're seeing so much of this here, where it's one of the reasons why. I mean, at the last part of my book, I think the biggest strong suit, or my own superpower, from ever since I was 16 years old, having my friends come into the hospital settings, singing and doing karaoke and playing the guitar in front of my mom when she was kind of on her deathbed in the ICU. I was 15 years old. That's not normal for a 15-year-old community to have that.
For sure.
And to be such a proponent of how do we create community, especially in our busy lives. Someone's going to have to go first. And, it's how we thrive. It's, when I talk about this principle in my book called Fly Forward, and the only way you can fly forward is through 5 steps. But in order to get through the 5 steps, right, you have a fall, and then you have an ignition, and then you're rising. And, then you're the 2 latter points is you're magnifying. And what are the ways where you magnify? You're blossoming. Well, maybe you have a really good social circle where you are letting other people in, and they're also supporting you. And that's also the way that you thrive as well. And we know this from our communities as well. How can we actually do this? Especially, I think there's also something that just came out where there's, people can only count on the number on one hand, maybe 1 or 2 people that they can actually confide in during a tough moment. And that's astounding. That's astounding that we only have, lack thereof of those emotional connections that really make us thrive in life.
Yeah, because I think what you're talking about is the fact that part of what helps us be resilient is the connections that we have with other people. Because when we allow other people to help us, when we invite them into our lives, so much of the story that you just told us about your sort of journey, the things that I went through with the breast cancer journey, it was about connecting with other people, allowing them in, becoming vulnerable, right? And making those connections, which again, to your point, the people who live the longest on this earth in the blue zones, who live over 100, it's because they have those social connections. That's a huge part of their longevity. It's a switch. It's a longevity switch, as I would say, right? And so I think this connection, I really love this connection of emotional resilience, the bounce back, the joy, the connection to others, the sharing, the vulnerability. It all goes together. So when you start thinking about it that way, it's so much more than just saying, oh, you need to be emotionally resilient. That's a hard one for a lot of people. They're like, well, what does that mean? But I think you've really helped to define that. So yeah, really, really helpful. I just have one last
Thank you.
question. I know we've been talking for a while. I could keep talking to you. I love talking to you. And especially because we found out we have so many connections from growing up in Chicago. So we didn't know each
Yeah.
other because there is an age difference between me and you. You're like 10 years younger than me, but we actually do know some people in common because I asked a couple of friends. So I'll tell you about that offline.
Oh,
But
fun.
my last question, my new book is called The Longevity Formula. In your experience, what do you see as the essential formula for longevity where our health span equals our lifespan?
Ooh. Yeah, I think, we have today, and to be able to be present with the people in our lives, to be able to have those brave conversations, to be able to choose
Mhm.
joy in the face of, the tough moments. And if not joy, maybe even cultivating that own inner peace, whether it's finding that inner peace within yourself, making peace with the little girl or the little boy in you that just needed
Mhm.
that compassion and love, and to live ferociously, unapologetically. I mean, one of the things that I've learned is in so many of my losses is we've got to be able to celebrate. And
Mhm.
I know that in my circles, I'm also called, I might be called the resilient queen, but I'm also called the joy bringer.
Mhm.
And I think life is a celebration. And if we go with that mantra, life is a celebration, then we can definitely be celebrating all of the different milestones, perhaps maybe good or bad, but to allow ourselves to have the duality of both of the feelings because they can go coexist at the same time.
Neetha, thank you so much for doing this podcast with me. Thank you for being here and your conversation. I've enjoyed it so much. So thank you.
Amazing, Avanti. I'm just so grateful for our connection and our discussion and pouring into your community.